This is a part of Peking opera play Empty Fort Strategy, based on Chapter 95 of Romance of the Three Kingdoms. The story tells how Zhuge Liang's first northern expedition, he and 2,500 war-weary soldiers were besieged by 150,000 fresh enemy soldiers. Just as the situation looked hopeless, Zhuge Liang came up with the Empty Fort Strategy, scoring a psychological victory over Sima Yi. Romance of the Three Kingdoms also tells how, on his way to join his sworn brother, Liu Bei, Guan Yu rode thousands of miles, breaking through 5 passes and killing 6 enemy generals on the way. In this episode, Guan Yu is depicted as an invincible, righteous man. Unfortunately, the events described in these well-known stories didn't actually take place. In each instance, the stories were made up by Luo Guanzhong. In fact, many well-known incidents from Romance of the Three Kingdoms are fictional, the products of Luo Guanzhong's fertile imagination. So how did Luo Guanzhong come up with these well-known stories? Where does fiction end and history begin in the world of the Three Kingdoms? The fictional element in Romance of the Three Kingdoms is primarily about characterization. Although broadly speaking, the romance is based on events that actually took place. In many instances, stories that actually involved one character are attributed to another. What seems to have been important to Luo Guanzhong is how well an episode fitted the character he'd created. The ancient book, Complete Works of Jin Dynasty, contains an article entitled 5 Things About Zhuge Liang, written by Guo Cheng. The article describes 5 things done by Zhuge Liang, Chancellor of the Shu state. The third one concerns the well-known empty fort strategy.
郭冲看来是一个诸葛亮的崇敬者。诸葛亮首次北伐的时候，司马懿还是曹魏的都督荆州诸军事，他是掌管荆州这个大区的军事的。他驻扎在哪儿？驻扎在渊城，也就是今天的河南南阳。驻扎在今天的河南南阳的司马懿，跟正在西北岐山一带的诸葛亮根本就见不着面儿。因此，空城计根本不可能在他们之间发生。
历史演义毕竟是一个小说，小说呢是文学，文学就应该虚构。那么这个虚构呢，就是在大的历史事件不违背史实的情况下，在这个大的这个情节不违背人物的性格的时候，在细节上呢经过了非常多的虚构。这样的话呢，就把一个三国这个历史给它文学化。那么这样的话，就赢得了很多读者。所以到现在我们读书的时候呢，大家宁愿去读《三国演义》，而且宁愿信它都是真的。
The Three Kingdoms period started when Cao Pi established the Wei state. It ended when the Wu state was annihilated by the Jin dynasty. The period only lasted for 60 years. Most historians consider the Yellow Turban Rebellion at the end of the Eastern Han dynasty to be the starting point of the Three Kingdoms period. Even then, the era barely lasted 100 years. Despite its brevity, it was one of the most exciting periods in Chinese history, full of incident and colorful characters. Chen Shou from the Shu state was the first person to commit the history of the era to paper. Chen Shou was born in Nanchong, Sichuan. When he was just 1 year old, Zhuge Liang died of illness on the Wuchang plain. In 280, when the Wu state was destroyed by the Western Jin dynasty, the turbulent period of the Three Kingdoms ended. That year, Chen Shou was 48 years old. It took him 10 years to collect and sort materials relating to the history of the century that had just passed. The result was the 30-volume Book of Wei, the 15-volume Book of Shu, and the 20-volume Book of Wu, the 3 books eventually being combined into Records of the Three Kingdoms. By the Northern Sung dynasty, woodblock printed copies of the book collection were being published. Chen Shou was described by later generations as a good historian, especially good at narration. And like his predecessors, Sima Qian and Bang Gu, he also fell in hard times. When Chen Shou was 31 years old, the Shu state was destroyed by the Wei state. 2 years later, Sima Yan usurped the throne and established the Jin dynasty. We can only imagine the great pain suffered by Chen Shou, an honest and sensitive scholar who had witnessed the demise of his state on 2 separate occasions.
司马迁、班固、陈寿，他们的命运都是比较坎坷的。我想其中有2点原因，一个就是修史历来有自己的传统，就是实事求是，不虚美，不隐恶，所以当权者不太喜欢他们。第二个原因呢，就是因为他们把自己的精力全都倾注于注史当中、修史当中，所以他们没有精力去经营自己，去钻营政治。
Confucius said, "If names be not correct, language is not in accordance with the truth of things." Legitimacy was the benchmark to evaluate all social values in ancient Chinese society. It was also the basis of political ethics. The key issue of those times was, which of the 3 states was the legitimate successor to the Han Dynasty? As an historian, Chen Shou had to make a choice. When he compiled records of the 3 kingdoms, he was an official of the Jin dynasty. As Ji Yun, also known as Ji Shaolan, a scholar of the Qing dynasty, wrote in summary of the general contents of records of the 3 kingdoms, the Wei state had to be the legitimate successor to Han, so that Jin would be a legitimate successor to Wei, because Wei was overthrown by Jin. Clearly, if Chen Shou denied the legitimacy of Jin, he would ruffle some very important feathers. Therefore, though Chen Shou was emotionally attached to his home state, he had to legitimize the Wei regime. He had no choice. Chen Shou's Records of the 3 Kingdoms was written in a biographical style. The chapter about Cao Cao was entitled Annals of Emperor Wu of Wei to demonstrate his legitimacy, whereas chapters about Liu Bei and Sun Quan were entitled Biography of the Former Lord and Biography of the Lord of Wu.
吴主传就是孙权的，但是呢，他虽然称吴主传，但是在新闻当中啊，他完全称名字，就是权怎么，他在新闻当中他就称孙权，就不称吴主，只有在这个书里面，他称先主后主，新闻当中看不到这个刘禅这个名字。
曹操史叫本，曹丕史叫本，因为他们是正统。但是孙权史叫薨，那是诸侯代月。照理说，你先祖也应该是薨，但是他先祖没有薨，先祖用的楚。中道本楚的话，就说是同义的，跟本同义的，所以他像这些地方一字之差，还是表现了他有对故国的君主有某种特别的待遇。
In Records of the 3 Kingdoms, Chen Shou employed a subtle writing style to conceal his true feelings. Gu Yanwu, a philosopher in the late Ming dynasty, believed that Chen Shou deliberately referred to Liu Bei and Liu Shan as the former lord and later lord to distinguish them from Sun Quan. Chen Shou's personal feelings and value judgments are even more evident in his evaluation of the rulers of the 3 states. He wrote that Cao Cao was an extraordinary man with great talent. Yet he did not praise Cao Cao's morality. From Chen Shou's point of view, Sun Quan was also an outstanding person. Yet he despised Sun Quan's moral character. Chen Shou believed that the downfall of the Wu state was a result of Sun Quan's brutality. As to Liu Bei, Chen Shou wrote that he was ambitious, strong-willed, kind-hearted, good at identifying talent. He was a hero on a par with Liu Ban, the founding emperor of the Han Dynasty. Chen Shou praised Liu Bei's decision to entrust Zhuge Liang with his heir and to take care of state affairs in Baidicheng. This showed Liu Bei's trust for Zhuge Liang. He believed this would be a model for future generations. More than 130 years after Chen Shou's records of the Three Kingdoms came out, Emperor Wen of Liu Song, during the southern dynasties, thought that it was too sketchy and had obvious defects. He asked Minister Pei Songju to write annotations for it. Pei Songju spent years looking for more information, finally completing this work in 429.
裴松之的注里面呢，补充了很多细节，有一些细节呢，裴松之自己在注的时候也说明是未必一定可靠，但是有这么一种说法，我把它记录下来，让后人参考。
这个注呢是根据《三国志》的情节，然后进行了补充。这个材料呢，补充了有140多种材料。那么这些材料里边呢，可以说大大的丰富了三国的材料。
可以说，没有裴松之的注，也就没有后来的《三国演义》小说。《三国演义》的小说大量的这个细节，不是来自于陈寿的这个《三国志》，而是来自于裴松之的注。
More than 1,000 years after Chen Shou euphemistically conveyed his comments on Cao Cao, Sun Quan, and Liu Bei in records of the Three Kingdoms, Luo Guanzhong praised Liu Bei and belittled Cao Cao and Sun Quan in his novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, even referring to Cao Cao as a traitor. Here, Liu Bei's regime is depicted as rightful successor to the Han Dynasty. Part of the purpose of the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms is to denigrate Wei and whitewash the reputation of the Shu state. Unlike writers of popular literature, historians of all dynasties have had to tailor their opinion to the prevailing political situation. In Chen Shou's records of the Three Kingdoms, written in the Jin dynasty, the Wei state was considered to be legitimate. Sima Guang's comprehensive mirror to aid in government, written during the Northern Song dynasty, indirectly acknowledges the legitimacy of the Wei state by adopting the Wei chronology. In the Southern Song dynasty, the legitimate successor was changed, and this change was also approved in the following dynasties. Conversely, when Zhu Xi compiled Outline and Details of Comprehensive Mirror to Aid in Government, he adopted the chronology of the Shu state. He was also clear that Cao Cao usurped the throne and accused him of being a traitor. Zhu Xi was a great Confucian master, a thinker who made the greatest contribution to the development of Confucianism in nearly 1,000 years. His Neo-Confucianism had huge influence on the Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties, coming to be regarded as state orthodoxy. Zhu Xi acknowledged the legitimacy of the Shu state because the Southern Song dynasty had lost the Central Plains and was unable to recover them. He was worried this would undermine the Southern Song dynasty's legitimacy, so he used the example of the Three Kingdoms and praised the Shu state, which, like the Southern Song dynasty, controlled only one part of the country in order to consolidate the legitimacy of the Southern Song dynasty. It can be said that his Outline and Details of Comprehensive Mirror to Aid in Government laid the foundations for Luo Guanzhong's novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
朱熹的通鉴纲目在政治问题上的处理，尤其是集中表现在对蜀汉、曹魏这个政位问题上的处理，应该就是定案了。这个事儿呢，与当时的学术思潮有关，与朱熹本人的学术地位有关，是吧？当然，与《资治通鉴纲目》本身，它的表达非常的简明，易于掌握，这个也有关。所以啊，从朱熹以后啊，基本上可以说一代无一词，是吧？ 大家都遵从这个说法。
At the end of the Yuan dynasty, when the official histories of the Song, Liao, and Jin dynasties were being compiled, a famous poet, Yang Weijin, raised the issue in his Debate on Legitimacy. While he supported the legitimacy of the Shu state, in the Qing dynasty, Ji Xiaolan, Grand Secretary to Emperor Qianlong, considered Yang Weijin's view ridiculous, removing his piece from Complete Library in 4 sections. However, Emperor Qianlong disagreed with Ji Xiaolan and wrote the long piece of his own to express his opinions. He wrote that although Wei and Wu had vast territories, the fact remained that Shu was the legitimate state. He believed that Shu had behaved in line with universal principles and in accordance with the traditional moral concepts of the Chinese people. As such, he ordered Ji Xiaolan to include Yang Weijin's article in Complete Library in 4 sections and put his imperial decree at the first page of the book.
到南宋的时候呢，就和蜀汉立国南方这一个情形是一致的，所以这个朱熹就高举起了这个尊刘贬曹的这个大旗。但是大一统的元明清为什么仍然继续这么做呢？就是用道德的制高点来占领这个老百姓的这个心灵的世界，占领整个中国文化、中国社会各个阶层的这个道德的世界。因此这一个方面是《三国演义》尊刘贬曹抑孙的这样一个现实的需要。
In 756, Cheng'an, the capital of the Tang dynasty, fell to rebels. The emperor, Li Longji, fled to Sichuan. For the first time, the political center of a Central Plains regime moved to Sichuan. Du Fu, a poet who also took refuge in Sichuan, thought of Liu Bei and Zhuge Liang, who were also in Sichuan during the Three Kingdoms period. Being unable to carry out his ideals, he respected and admired Zhuge Liang. In a poem written during a visit to the Wu Hao Shrine in Chengdu, he wrote, "Thrice the king visited him for the state's gains and pains. He served heart and soul the kingdom during 2 reigns." 400 years later, Wang Shipang, a poet of the southern Song dynasty, came to Guizhou, which is in today's Sichuan province. He also admired Zhuge Liang, Du Fu, Yan Zhenxing, Han Yu, and Fan Zhongyan. Having visited the temple of Liu Bei and Wu Hu Shrine, he wrote, "I've seen the stone sentinel maze and carefully read records of the 3 kingdoms. Although I have wine, I will not sacrifice it to the Wei state." It was an expression of his ambition to recover the lost Central Plains. 50 years later, Lu Yo, a poet of the southern Song dynasty, recalled his former ambition to take part in a northern expedition in a poem. "On a snowy night at Guizhou Ferry, our warships defeated the enemies. Against the autumn winds, our armed cavalry reclaimed Dasan Pass. For thousands of years, there was no one as loyal and devoted as Zhuge Liang." Nearly 100 years later, Wen Tianshang, captured by the Mongol army, wrote the Song of Integrity. "Between the heaven and earth, there is righteousness upon which all things grow. Even the ghosts are touched by Zhuge Liang's heroic spirit to reclaim the lost land." He elevated Zhuge Liang's memorial on sending out the troops to the height of the soul of the Chinese nation.
这三国人物的形象，它其实是一个不断的丰富、不断的圆满的一个过程。我们不仅仅应该认为它是离历史越来越远的一个过程，不应该只是从历史，就是它跟真实的历史人物的距离去理解 三国演义》里面的这个三国人物形象，而是要从它凝聚的就是不同时期不同人物的情感的这个角度去理解《三国演义》。
The most direct influence on Luo Guanzhong's Romance of the Three Kingdoms was the picture storybook Popular Stories of the Three Kingdoms. Containing sequential drawings accompanied by relatively simple text, it first came out 700 years ago in the Yuan dynasty. In 1929, Zheng Zhenduo, a famous historian of literature, published an article entitled Evolution of Romance of the Three Kingdoms in Fiction Monthly. In his article, he wrote, "What kind of person was Luo Guanzhong? No one has ever given a detailed account of his life. The reason is that he was a novelist and opera writer. He wasn't regarded as serious enough to merit a biography." In 1919, Hu Shi proposed to reorganize national heritage and rebuild cultures. Books containing anecdotes, novels, and operas began to be treated equally as traditional Confucian classics and included in the objects of historical researches. Luo Guanzhong, author of the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, was gradually taken seriously by researchers. Lu Xun wrote in A Brief History of Chinese Novels that Luo Guanzhong was from Qiantang, which is in today's Hangzhou. Hu Shi wrote in the preface to the newly published Romance of the Three Kingdoms that people used to say that the author of Romance of the Three Kingdoms was a man from Hangzhou named Luo Guanzhong, who lived in the late Yuan and early Ming dynasties. Until 1931, when Zheng Zhenduo found a book that recorded operas in the Yuan and Ming dynasties in Tianyi Pavilion in Ningbo. A paragraph in it says that Luo Guanzhong was from Taiyuan, Shanxi province. He didn't have many friends, but his literary works were refreshing. This is the earliest and most reliable reference to Luo Guanzhong's place of birth. For Zheng Zhenduo, this was a revelation. It proved that earlier statements on Luo Guanzhong's hometown were wrong. While the view that Luo Guanzhong was from Taiyuan, Shanxi province, became the mainstream one, during the 1980s, things began to change. During this period, renewed interest in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms brought the issue of Luo Guanzhong's hometown once again into question. The debate over whether he was from Taiyuan in Shanxi province or Dongping in Shandong province continues to this day. Before Luo Guanzhong wrote Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the legitimacy of the Shu state was widely accepted, a perspective reflected in popular stories and dramas. However, Luo Guanzhong was still not satisfied. He thought these popular literary works were crude and misrepresented. They contained a lot of stories about the Buddhist concept of karma, and these stories were not consistent with historical facts or Confucian concepts. As a result, they were not accepted by intellectuals at that time. Therefore, Luo Guanzhong believed it was his mission to highlight the social significance of his novel from a moral and historical perspective. When he wrote the novel, the people praised the Shou state and denounced the Wei state, not simply because the legitimacy of the Shou state was recognized by the authorities. People have always chosen to follow those who treat them better. This prompted Luo Guanzhong to depict Cao Cao as a cruel and treacherous man, and Liu Bei a kind-hearted man. In his depictions, Luo Guanzhong was creating literary models of Confucian morality.
我们现在看到的罗贯中的《三国演义》这个文本呈现出来的给大家的各种各样非常丰满的三国人物的形象，它肯定不是罗贯中个人创作的一个成果，而是长期以来的不同历史时期、不同社会阶层，从他们各自的历史处境、生活处境出发，给历史人物的一个特定的情感的价值观念的一个投射在这种投射下，他们不断的在塑造新的三国人物的形象。
千百年来就是参与创作《三国演义》的三国故事的这么多的这个人群，思想观念都在其中所以他应该是一个集大成，他应该是一个整理者整理基础上的一个创作。从这个角度说中国传统文化的很多东西都走进了三国故事。
This is the earliest edition of Romance of the Three Kingdoms, published in 1522. In the preface, the author commented on the relationship between history and fiction. He wrote that in addition to facts, history should also include standards of value judgment. Historical records are difficult for most people to understand. Luo Guanzhong's novel, however, demonstrates the social ideals advocated by Confucianism in plain words. It's a work that anyone can read and understand. In the early years of the Qing dynasty, Mao Zedong said that Romance of the Three Kingdoms was the most popular novel among scholars. He believed people loved the novel because there were so many heroes in the period of Three Kingdoms. He even prepared a revised edition of the work.
《三国演义》呢，自从成书以后，由于深受社会各阶层的欢迎，出现了大量的课本。我们今天能够看到的明代版本就有大约30种之多，清代版本有70种之多，远远超过其他中国古代小说名著。那么众多的三国版本当中，自清代康熙年间以来这300年间，流行最广的是毛伦、毛宗岗父子修改评阅的《三国演义》，我们通常简称为毛本三国。
毛宗岗他们突出了作品的正统的倾向， 突出了拥有反潮的思想感情。毛宗刚的评论本呢，对于《三国演义》作品里边的思想内涵的体会，他也有独到之处，是吧？比方说，这个开篇那首词，啊，滚滚长江东逝水，浪花淘尽英雄。
这首诗大家知道，跟罗贯中没有任何关系。这是后来毛宗刚大家知道，把明代状元杨慎的这个说这个什么呢，17史里面的一个这个词给挪过来的。但是它跟《三国演义》珠联璧合，就是这首诗放在前面一个什么作用？一个起到了一个基调，就是什么呢？奠定了一个悲剧的氛围。
Indeed, the sheer numbers of different editions testifies to the enduring popularity of Romance of the Three Kingdoms. In 1922, under the impetus of the New Culture movement, the Yadong Library of Shanghai published a new edition of Romance of the Three Kingdoms. The library also invited Hu Shu, who advocated the use of vernacular Chinese in literature, to write a preface to the new edition. Hu Shu wrote, "Romance of the Three Kingdoms is an excellent popular historical novel. For thousands of years, no other book has been produced that has its magic," he continued. Over the past 500 years, countless uneducated citizens have acquired common sense and wisdom, learned the skills of reading, writing, getting along with people, and adapting to the world from this book. We should all show our respect and gratitude to the author. The relationship between literature and society depends on sensitive description of society. If it is powerful, it will influence society and bring about change. Liu Xun's comment reveals the special relationship between literature and social change. But creative writers are not the only sensitive agents of social changes. Many historians with profound insights have assumed social responsibilities. Chen Shou, a great scholar of Chinese traditional studies, believed that historical studies concerned not only the past, but also held the key to the future.
文学的三国和历史的三国是一个差别很大的东西。所以我们理解中国社会、理解中国历史，这两个都有它的价值。历史的三国让我们看到真实的历史，而真实的历史对今天是最有借鉴和启发意义的，是我们前人做过的事情。而文学的三国呢，文学的三国给我们提供了民间的价值判断。就跟我们讲民间传说、民间故事很重要，因为它是民间的价值、民间的喜好。它仍然是一个重要的问题。
Romance of the Three Kingdoms was completed in the 14th century, about 1,000 years after Records of the Three Kingdoms. The dividing line between historical fact and fiction has always been a cause of controversy. As Zhang Shuqian, a Qin dynasty historian, remarked, while Romance of the Three Kingdoms contains mostly facts, the fictions it contains have confused the readers, giving them a misleading view of real history. However, it is undeniable that for more than 600 years, since the Ming and Qing dynasties, politicians and intellectuals have used it to interpret national policies and draw lessons from it, while ordinary people have used it to learn about life and the world. For that reason, in all the long history of China, There are few epochs that have the same hold over the popular imagination. It is undoubtedly closely related to Romance of the Three Kingdoms and the operas adapted from the novel. Even before The Romance of the Three Kingdoms was completed, there were already many operas about the Three Kingdoms. There were 21 Yuan operas about the Three Kingdoms period, including Guan Yu meets Lu Su, written by Guan Hanqing. Roughly 60 about the Three Kingdoms, including incomplete ones, have been identified. This shows how popular these operas were back then. After the birth of Peking opera, operas about the Three Kingdoms became even more popular. In the mid-19th century, Lu Shanghui, a scholar, joined the Sanqing troupe, one of the four major Hui opera troupes. He and Cheng Changgung, the troupe leader, wrote and directed a 36-scenes opera, The Three Kingdoms. Peking opera artists endowed Zhuge Liang, Cao Cao, Guan Yu, Liu Bei, Sun Quan, Zhou Yu, and other characters with more vivid personalities. To some extent, the emergence of the operas about Three Kingdoms elevated Peking opera. At the same time, operas about the Three Kingdoms expanded the influence of the novel, offering another way for the common people to learn about the Three Kingdoms. Therefore, with the help of Peking opera, the ancient Three Kingdoms gained a new lease on life.
在一个大家受教育程度普遍偏低的这样一个时代呢，一般说来，听戏即是读书，戏剧呢就承担起了传播历史知识、传播道德观念和公序良俗这么一个工具的作用。到了清末民初，由于文人的加入，戏曲当中，尤其是三国戏当中，这种特点就更加突出了。
清末的一个著名的就叫王孝农，这个戏曲大家，他曾经创作了4部，改编和创作4部三国戏。因为骂王朗，他是借诸葛亮骂王仁的口，是去骂清政府。这从高台教化，最后他就是有意识的用他的戏曲去唤醒民众，是吧？认识当时政府的腐败，唤起大家这个爱国的这种热情。
The court theatrical office was an imperial organization in the Qing dynasty that managed theatrical affairs. The office issued a widely accepted guide on costumes and makeup of various opera figures. The instruction beside the painting of Cao Cao says it should be strictly followed. Unsurprisingly, artists came to believe that the portrayal of Cao Cao as white-faced, which signifies treachery, reflected the will of the imperial court.
演戏，它也不光是为统治阶级服务，其实老百姓中间的有一些价值观念啊，比如说孝敬父母啊，是吧？朋友之间应该有义气啊，这类呢，实际上呢是一种，大家比较从统治阶级也好，从那个老百姓也好，其中有一些大家比较认同的，有一些伦理道德的东西，有时候在舞台上还是比较受欢迎的。
More than 1,700 years ago, Chen Shou was still studying in the Shu state, his teacher warning him that though he would be famous for his talent, he would be slandered for it too. It was an accurate prophecy. Chen Shou's state was overthrown. His career was a rocky one. Demoted twice, even when he made a comeback, his career continued to be plagued by power struggles. Unable to fulfill his potential, he died a broken man. Therefore, some scholars say that it is often the losers, rather than the winners, who possess real insight into historical reality. It was probably Chen Shou's fate to live in the shadows after his state was conquered. A 1,000 years later, the first full-length serial novel in Chinese history appeared. Its author, an unknown scholar. To this day, people are still debating whether Luo Guanzhong, author of the novel, was from Taiyuan in Shanxi province or Dongping in Shandong province. Based on limited historical records about Luo Guanzhong, we vaguely know that he was a lonely person, and although very talented, he, like Chen Shou, did not fulfill his potential. Indeed, so obscure was he that nobody knows his final resting place. All anyone knows is that he became a great writer, one with an enduring reputation. Novelist Luo Guanzhong and historian Chen Shou were separated by 1,000 years of time. They met and collided across time, and together they enlightened future generations with the light of Chinese civilization.